In a landmark decision that will reverberate across the globe, the United States Supreme Court has struck down President Donald Trump's sweeping global tariffs, a move that has sent shockwaves through both political and economic circles. By dismantling a core pillar of his administration's economic policy, the court has fundamentally altered the landscape of international trade and the way America engages with the world. This historic ruling reasserts congressional power over trade, checking the expanding authority of the executive branch and signaling a major shift in American economic strategy. For years, presidents have wielded broad powers to impose tariffs, but the court's decision marks a return to the constitutional balance of power, where Congress holds the reins on trade policy. For months, businesses and consumers have faced rising prices, supply chain disruptions, and deep uncertainty. This decision promises an end to that era. Small business owners, manufacturers, and everyday shoppers have all felt the pinch, and now many are hopeful that relief is on the horizon. The verdict offers much-needed relief to international allies, especially the 8 European nations recently targeted by new tariffs tied to the controversial Greenland Purchase demand. European leaders have welcomed the decision, seeing it as a step toward restoring trust and stability in transatlantic relations. By invalidating the mechanism behind these tariffs, the court averts a potential crisis in US-Europe relations, opening the door for renewed cooperation and dialogue. Diplomats on both sides are now working to rebuild partnerships strained by months of uncertainty and tension. Ultimately, the court's move returns the power to regulate trade to Congress, restoring a more democratic and transparent process to U.S. trade policy. Lawmakers are now tasked with crafting new trade laws that reflect the interests of the American people and their global partners. The era of presidentially imposed global tariffs has come to an abrupt and decisive end, ushering in a new chapter for American trade, one defined by collaboration, oversight, and a renewed commitment to the rule of law. The roots of today's Supreme Court decision trace back to April 2025, when President Trump launched a sweeping tariff regime targeting nearly every country, citing national security. This move was seen as a bold and aggressive strategy to protect American interests. Unlike previous targeted actions, this was a broad, unpredictable application of economic pressure, justified by a controversial reading of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. The administration argued that the economic threats justified such measures. The administration used IEPA to bypass Congress and impose tariffs at will, a move immediately challenged by legal scholars and business groups. Critics argued that this overreach undermined the checks and balances of the U.S. government. Tensions peaked with new tariffs against 8 European allies, linked to a demand for the purchase of Greenland, an ultimatum that sparked a diplomatic firestorm. The international community was taken aback by the audacity of the demand. European leaders condemned the move, and high-level talks began, but the threat of tariffs loomed. The diplomatic relations between the U.S. and its allies were strained to a breaking point. This unprecedented use of IEPA, combined with aggressive diplomacy and significant economic consequences, set the stage for a legal showdown at the Supreme Court. The stakes were incredibly high, with potential global economic repercussions. The judiciary was forced to weigh in on one of the most contentious policy debates of the decade. The decision would not only impact U.S. law but also set a precedent for future executive actions. The legal battle centered on whether the president's use of IEPA to impose global tariffs overstepped constitutional limits. The administration argued that IEPA's language allowed broad action in response to persistent global threats, transforming it into a tool for general economic management. Opponents pointed to Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress, not the president, the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. They argued that the administration's approach dangerously concentrated power in the executive branch. The Supreme Court was not asked to judge the wisdom of tariffs, but to decide if the president's actions violated the separation of powers. Legal briefs asserted that Congress never intended IEEPA as a blank check for unilateral trade policy. The case became a high-stakes test of constitutional boundaries in economic policymaking. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court declared the administration's use of IEPA for global tariffs unconstitutional. The majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice Roberts, clarified that IEPA is for genuine emergencies, not for creating a permanent discretionary tariff system. The ruling restores Congress's constitutional authority over trade, emphasizing that broad economic policymaking cannot be done unilaterally by the president. The dissent argued for more deference to executive authority in national security, but the majority saw the administration's actions as a constitutional overreach. The immediate effect: all tariffs imposed under the 2025 IEPA declaration, including those targeting Europe, are now void. The president can still seek tariffs through other legal avenues, but IEPA can no longer be used for sweeping trade duties. Any future large-scale tariff policy must now go through Congress. The Supreme Court's decision sent global markets soaring as investors welcomed the end of tariff-driven uncertainty. U.S. stock futures surged, and international leaders, especially in Europe, expressed relief and called for renewed partnership with America. The Danish Prime Minister reiterated Greenland was not for sale, but welcomed a chance to reset relations. Domestically, business groups praised the ruling for restoring stability, while the White House condemned it as a political attack. President Trump vowed to continue his trade agenda by other means, setting up a new political battle. Treasury officials defended the administration's approach, but the court's decision has clearly shifted the landscape. The stage is set for contentious debates over the future of U.S. trade policy. The end of the tariffs is expected to provide a much-needed boost to the American economy, especially for small and medium-sized businesses that have been hit the hardest by rising costs and supply chain disruptions. For many of these businesses, the tariffs meant higher prices on essential goods and materials, making it difficult to stay competitive and keep their doors open. Now, with the removal of these trade barriers, there is a renewed sense of hope and optimism on main streets across the country. The tariffs had essentially acted as a tax on imports, squeezing profits for American companies and raising prices for everyday consumers. Families felt the pinch at the checkout line, while businesses struggled to absorb the extra costs or pass them on to customers. The uncertainty around trade policy also made it difficult for companies to plan for the future, invest in growth, or hire new workers. With their removal, economists predict a gradual easing of inflation and a rebound in consumer spending. Lower prices on imported goods could mean more money in Americans' pockets, encouraging people to shop, travel, and invest in their communities. This could help jumpstart local economies and support job growth in sectors that have struggled in recent years. Of course, some domestic industries that benefited from protection may now face tougher competition from abroad, and there are concerns about how quickly they can adapt. But for most businesses, the return to a more predictable trade environment is a welcome change, offering stability and the chance to plan for the future with greater confidence. The abrupt policy shift will require companies to adjust their supply chains and pricing strategies, and some may face short-term challenges as they adapt. However, the long-term benefit is a more stable environment for investment, innovation, and growth. Businesses can now focus on expanding operations, hiring new employees, and developing new products without the looming threat of sudden policy changes. The decision also returns tariff-setting authority to Congress, ensuring that future trade policy is openly debated and legislated, rather than dictated by executive order. This shift strengthens democratic oversight and gives a voice to a wider range of stakeholders in shaping America's economic future. This renewed confidence is vital for long-term growth and job creation, as businesses and workers alike look forward to a more predictable and prosperous future. The debate over free trade versus protectionism will undoubtedly continue, but now it will take place within the constitutional framework, with the voices of the American people and their representatives guiding the path forward. Politically, the Supreme Court's decision is a major defeat for President Trump, undermining a signature policy and shifting power back to Congress. The ruling forces lawmakers to take responsibility for trade policy, likely leading to more debate but also more democratic decision-making. It sets a precedent that limits future presidents' ability to use emergency powers for broad economic actions. Legal scholars see this as part of a trend. The judiciary is increasingly policing executive authority in economic matters. President Trump's defiant response signals ongoing conflict as he seeks new ways to pursue his agenda. Congress must now decide whether to collaborate with the president or assert its newly reaffirmed authority. The future of American trade policy will be shaped by this new balance of power. Legal and economic experts agree the Supreme Court's ruling is a landmark for the separation of powers. Columbia Law's Catherine Judge calls it a reassertion of Article 1, setting a precedent for generations. Economists like Mark Zandi say the decision removes uncertainty, unlocking investment and boosting growth. Not all experts are optimistic. Some warn the ruling could slow America's response to global threats by requiring congressional approval for major trade actions. Diplomats see an opportunity to repair alliances, urging the administration to rescind the Greenland demand and rebuild trust with Europe. The decision's impact will depend on whether political leaders embrace this new legal reality or continue to fight it. The path forward is open, but the rules have changed. America's approach to global economic challenges will now be forged through cooperation, not unilateral action. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point, restoring the constitutional balance of power and ending an era of executive-led protectionism. Markets are rallying, businesses are relieved, and diplomatic ties have a chance to heal. For Americans, the ruling promises relief from rising costs and economic anxiety. The long-term path is uncertain. Congress must reclaim its authority, and the administration's response could shape future conflicts. This case is a powerful civics lesson, highlighting the importance of checks and balances in American government. The debate over trade, executive power, and America's global role now returns to Congress and the people. The conversation is just beginning.